Don't you worry, the clip's about to begin, but don't forget to subscribe. Or else, don't make me turn this website around.
All right, let's do it. Let's party. We're going to take call number 1. We're going to talk to Katie. Hi, Katie. You are on the line. What would you like to talk with us about today?
Hello, Shannon. Matt actually told me to ask you this.
Oh, okay.
And hi, Hannah. I told you
Hello.
I'd call.
Oh yeah, you were in the stream earlier.
So, I have a therapy assignment to figure out, it's in my book to figure out a higher power. The issue obviously being I'm an atheist and a bit of a skeptic, so it's kind of like a bit of a conundrum.
Okay, what kind of therapy project? Is this something that like your personal therapist assigned to you as a project as part of your personal therapy? Or is this part of a course?
It's part of a DBT workbook.
What's a DBT workbook? Like behavioral therapy?
Yeah, dialectical behavioral therapy.
Okay. So is this a workbook that you're going through as your own personal therapy?
No, I'm working through it with my therapist. It's a part of, like, we're going to go through this and then we're going to do either CET or PET or something like that.
Okay. So your therapist assigned you a project where you need to define what a higher power is?
Yeah.
Is your therapist aware that you're an atheist?
Very much so, and she was very confused as to why being an atheist was important to me especially whenever I mentioned the community.
That's tough.
Go ahead, Hannah.
I was just going to say, I've been in a similar situation years ago. This is when I was still a minor. I was like 17 or something, maybe 16. I'm not exactly positive. But this is around the time I was really, really struggling with, like, losing my faith. And I was having a lot of, like, existential issues in regard to that. And I was feeling depressed and you know, also general teenage stuff, not to mention I'm trans and I was in the closet at the time, which I'm sure wasn't helping. It was a whole mess of issues. And then my mom picked a therapist for me who happened to be not just religious, but the therapy was branded as Christian therapy. So sometimes the perspective that the therapist would have was pretty antithetical to the feelings I was having. In the end, for me, it ended up being beneficial to seek other therapeutic help because that person's perspective wasn't meshing with mine. I'm not necessarily saying that's what you should do in this situation, but just talking about this specific assignment, it might help define to the therapist what that might mean to you non-religiously. So if we're talking about, like, higher powers as a non-religious person, it's a little hard. You should be specific in talking about, like, this isn't meaning that this is some supreme force, but there are things that are more important than oneself. Like talking about, like, community and society. Those things are sort of higher powers in the sense that they matter and that they're things you hold in high esteem and that they can be guiding in certain ways, but it's just not the same as a deity. At least that's the avenue I would go with it. I don't know, though. That's kind of tough.
That's
definitely better than where my brain went, because my brain went, okay, who's an authority figure? And I'm like, no thanks, I am not putting the police as my higher power.
Right. And we also shouldn't venerate any individual to that level because there's a degree of fallibility, right? So the idea of venerating anybody to that level is I don't think necessarily healthy either, which is something that I would bring up with your therapist. Why do I need to venerate somebody, something, some being external to myself in order to understand myself better? How do those two mesh with one another? Why do I need to look external to myself, to somebody who is independent of me, in order to be the best version of myself? Something along those lines is something that I would approach them with, because any therapists who, I'm going to couch this because it's something that I'm passionate about. Therapists can, and counselors and psychiatrists can very, very, very much be religious themselves and still do a fantastic job of being a counselor, therapist, a psychiatrist, psychologist. When you start to incorporate belief systems into the therapeutic environment and present them as a necessity for mental health, that is a serious issue, because it's not a necessity for mental health. And if it's proposed as though it is, you'll create a reliability paradigm where if you ever have a crisis of faith, that crisis becomes something that's introspectively a crisis as well, something that is attached to your sense of being or sense of self, as opposed to your sense of being and sense of self being grounded in something reasonable, rational, and reliable, and something that you can think through. Like, your sense of self should be grounded in your introspective perception of yourself, not your perceived value to some external model of a deity or whatever that might be. It's not a valuable construct to introduce into a therapeutic environment independently, specifically if that person's an atheist. My concern ethically here right now is that you've spoken to somebody who's in a counseling position about what your belief structure is, and they're attempting to use the therapeutic environment to augment your belief structure, and that's not something that I can ethically stand behind. So I wouldn't even complete the assignment. I would ask her some serious questions about why she perceives this assignment as being valuable to you, and push back stating that you don't want belief systems in higher powers being incorporated into your therapeutic environment, because it is not her place to help guide you towards what your theistic beliefs are or are not, and that is not why you're there.
Yeah, like I had that issue with AA and NA because they would do the whole, well, your higher power could be a rock or a doorknob for all we care. And it's like, I know you're just mocking the idea to try to get me into your church.
It's not even that they're mocking the idea in those situations. What they're doing there is introducing the conceptualization of a higher power or something external to yourself being an important locus of behavioral control. And so when you are attempting to augment behavior, and you're referencing that. So if they give you this behavioral model that you're referencing this external locus of control in order to adhere to a certain behavioral path, like an accountability metric or matrix, I think is what they usually would call it, then they can introduce that to you through any means necessary. So it could be a doorknob, it could be whatever, but they're getting you to introduce that as a component of your thought process when it comes to accountability matrices. And it's not a healthy accountability matrix, because how are you being held accountable to a doorknob unless you're creating an external system of accountability to assign to that doorknob, for example, and then hold yourself to? And if you're creating a system of accountability essentially independently in that scenario, then you don't require the external being or the external thing or the tangible object in order to create that system of accountability. You can create a system of accountability independent of that.
That makes sense.
I hope that helps. I know Matt told you to call me, and he probably anticipated I would do something like that because he knows how ardently I feel about theistic abuse in the therapeutic environment and introductions of indoctrinations as a form of therapy. So I just don't like it. It makes me feel yuck. And it seems like it's causing you a form of dissonance, which is one of the reasons that I don't like it, because it's not necessary for you. You recognize that, and you're struggling with it because it's not necessarily helping you. It's just causing you further struggle. And it's related to your treatment.
It just reminds me of, like, because when I was when I was detransitioning, I didn't know atheism was a thing. So I went into, like, I tried every religion I could find wholeheartedly, thinking I was flawed in everything. So it's just bringing up those emotions. It's like, okay, I got to work through this logically because I'm trying to figure out how do I answer this.
Right. Yeah, no, that's fair. I hope that some of what Hannah and I offered is helpful to you, but ultimately the journey is your own. I don't think it would necessarily be a deal breaker in a therapeutic environment. That your therapist just may not be used to dealing with atheists, and this may be something that's been incorporated in the past with some metric of success because she or they have been dealing with theists in the past, and it's something that seems organic to them, so there'd been no pushback. But it might be worth bringing up that you don't feel as though it's the appropriate environment to engage in conversations about belief systems, and that's not why you're there, and you'd like to pursue a different path. I don't know, Hannah, do you disagree?
No, I agree. I think I'm hoping your interpretation is correct. It's just that I've been in a situation where I had a therapist who was pretty intentionally proselytizing to myself. So I'm hoping that's not the case here. Like, even though and it was maddening too, because they were like, "Oh, I'm not doing that," but then they would go on to clearly do that. So I hope it's a miscommunication and they're just not used to dealing with, non-religious individuals. Yeah,
me too. So yeah, I hope we give
you're right. I'll give you 100 biddies.
That's a fair deal. All right, Katie, thank you so much for calling. I hope some of that was valuable to you and really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank
See you later.
You so much.
You're welcome. Bye, Katie.
Talk to you later.
Oh, that makes me so mad. And like, I've done an entire series on my channel on Christian counseling. It's something that just infuriates me. Absolutely, utterly. The idea that somebody can turn to you for help and you can utilize religious indoctrination and these manipulation tactics to attempt to get somebody to a belief system and then conflate that with being better, right? Because you're assigning any. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because it's vulnerable people who are seeking out help in some way, and to use that space that's supposed to be a place of helping, construct some better version of yourself, and to try and use that as some underhanded way to push some belief system, almost regardless of what it is. It's so messed up.
Yeah, I mean, samesies. I have nothing to add to that. It's like half my life's work is just calling those people out.
Hey, thanks for checking out this clip for The Line. While you're here, hit that like button, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and then share this with that bitter uncle of yours who loves talking about the good old days.